In DC, for DC. DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and DCRadio.gov.
Hello, I am Sandra Mattavous-Frye, People's Counsel for the District of Columbia. Welcome to this inaugural edition of OPC Radio Connect. We are really excited to be on DC Radio to talk to you about the work of the Office of the People's Counsel, or OPC as we're known, on behalf of all district utility consumers. The utility industry has changed dramatically over the last few years. There are new players, new business models, and more consumer options. On OPC Radio Connect, we will bring you information about a variety of issues related to your natural gas, electric, telephone, and water service. The environment and climate change will also be discussed, as well as we shall provide energy tips and tell you how all of this figures into your daily living. You're going to hear from OPC staff members, from experts in the field, and other advocates. Today, we have three fantastic guests, all of whom played a critical and essential role in the creation and development of the Office of the People's Counsel. First, Brian Lederer, who served as second People's Counsel from 1977 to 1984. Dr. Jerome Page, a longtime activist and lay consumer advocate. And Jean Gross Bethel, who serves as a consumer outreach specialist at OPC and is the liaison with our senior community. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra.
Before you hear from our guests, and because I know so many people really don't know about OPC or haven't heard about OPC, so what I want to do is to share with you a little of the background on why the Office of People's Counsel was created reestablished in 1975, and more importantly, why it is needed today. One of the facts that many people don't know is that OPC, or the Office of People's Counsel, was actually created in 1922. It was then disbanded in 1952 because the powers that be believed that it wasn't necessary and that the Public Service Commission could do both roles. There was a 20-year hiatus. And it was reestablished following the cries of consumers wanting an independent agency that could represent their interests, because the Public Service Commission obviously could not effectively do a dual role of balancing the interest of the utilities and advocating independently for consumers. This is why it was created and why, more importantly, it is still needed. Again, I am Sandra Mattavous-Frye. I first came to OPC in 1984. I was hired by Mr. Lederer, by Brian Lederer. Over the years, I've served as trial attorney, senior attorney, and deputy People's Counsel before being appointed as the fifth People's Counsel in 2011.
Great.
I'm a graduate of Howard University and the Antioch School of Law, now the David A. Clark School of Law. As I mentioned, OPC was reborn in 1975 after a 20-year hiatus. OPC's mission is advocating, educating, and protecting utility consumers. Simply put, we are the voice and legal arm of district utility consumers. For example, we represent the public interest in trials and cases before the DC Public Service Commission, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Federal Communications Commission, as well as the courts. OPC's staff attorneys also represent individual utility customers with complaints about their utility service or bills. And we have an extensive consumer education and outreach program. On any given day, you might see our staff at a community event or meeting in neighborhoods in all 8 wards. We covered, last year alone, over 300 community meetings. Through various in-house programs and policies, we support the district's sustainability and climate change goals. In sum, it is our job to ensure consumers are informed, educated, and engaged as we confront the new energy and utility world. Now let's meet our guest. A native of Honolulu, Hawaii, he is a graduate of Harvard University, the London School of Economics, and the University of Washington School of Law. He practiced law in Hawaii, Arkansas, and the district prior to becoming People's Counsel in 1977. He is attorney Brian Lederer. And on a personal note, as I mentioned, he was the People's Counsel when I first came to the Office of People's Counsel. And he was really known as being for the people and of the people. And he pulled upon his background as a community activist. Next, we will have and hear from our community outreach specialist in the Consumer Services Division of the office. She serves also as our community liaison for the elderly. Ms. Jean Gross Bethel began her career at OPC in 1984 and is one of the most senior of our staff members and certainly one of our most senior community member. Our third panelist, Dr. Jerome Page, who's a principal at Jerome S. Page and Associates, is a forensic economist. Dr. Page has more than 30 years of experience in higher education, the public sector, and nonprofit organizations. He's the author of several reports on policy issues, such as neighborhood revitalization, public utilities, energy, and citizen participation. Dr. Page has worked with OPC on a variety of projects, including his study of the potential for solar in low and moderate income DC communities, which we commissioned in addition to the value of solar study that we produced and released in 2016. Dr. Page is also a founding member of the original Consumer Utility Board, CUB. He has been instrumental in assisting the office in really touching base with community members, civic associations, and just the grassroots public. He is one of the advocates that has boots in the trenches. Again, welcome to each of you. I'm going to start with a couple of questions to you, Brian. Would you really take a moment to tell us why was it so critical to reestablish OPC in 1975? What was going on? What motivated, what propelled the creation of OPC, the reestablishment of OPC?
What propelled the establishment of OPC was when energy went from being a minor issue that nobody paid attention to one of the most critical economic issues of the whole world from the Arab oil embargo. And the price of gasoline went from like 27 cents a gallon to over $1. And it was what we might call a clear and present systemic crisis. And the public, the people who had to pay the bill, had no effective way of saying anything about it other than complaining wasn't effective. And so in D.C., and this is unique in that the people, the council realized that the city could not protect itself unless they had an effective advocate connected to the community, connected to them, who could put on a real case. And so they reenacted the Office of People's Counsel. It had been abolished because the utility said it was unnecessary and the commission was taking care of it. Well, as we learned through unfortunate experience, they were taking care of it for themselves. And so we had a seminal fight, as everybody knows, and we got legislation with the support of the committee that said the commission can't do that anymore. And the mayor vetoed it because the commission didn't like that, but the community came out and the veto was overridden 11-1. So it's like vindicated, what the office is there for. And it's really made a difference, I would say. It's really made a difference. We've had major issues, so it's really made a difference. And I'm grateful for you for carrying the torch.
Well, certainly it's the example of my predecessors that really lit the way for trying, for advocating on behalf of consumers. One of my goals, as always, is to make certain that consumers have a voice or that they have a place at the table. Do you see that as a factor? Do you think that it has been accomplished? And what difference does it make?
Well, it's indispensable, actually. And because without which the public will get just run over by the 10,000-ton elephant that the utilities are. I learned this when I first started out representing the public in Arkansas concerning a big nuclear power plant issue, and we had all the right answers. We presented all the case, and the people who were with the big interest just sat there and played their fiddles. They didn't do anything, and they got everything, and we lost. And I realized the problem was that the commission, while humoring us, had no political fear of us. And unless we could punish them politically, it didn't matter, how we tied our shoes. So I said, this is too much work to do. And then what happened, and this is why I credit Jerome and Charlie and all the people who said, we want a voice. And they put their heart and souls into having a voice, and then we formed an alliance, okay? And so that really made a difference. So when the utilities didn't like what we did, the community, and with the support of our work, had the confidence of the mayor, the council, like Wilhelmina Rolark and others. And so when we had the showdown, they got blasted. And that's why the office is there.
Jerome, why don't you chime in? You were, as Brian mentioned, you were one of the founding members of CUB, but what motivated you to join this fight, to join the forces? Where did you see the need?
Well, I was recruited for the struggle. I was sitting in my office, I remember it vividly, on E Street, who used to be in the UDC, at that time was in the old Pepco building. And Rick Powell and Lenora Pomerantz showed up in my office to talk to me about joining this group that was being formed called CUB and working on ultimately was the report to the community. So they made a convincing case, and I decided to join in and have been part of the advocate community around utilities ever since. So I credit everything to Rick and to Lenore for bringing me and then leading not only to generating reports and studies, but also when I was at UDC, I taught some courses in public utility economics. And just recently at a national convention, economics convention, I ran across one of my students who his career had launched into being in energy ever since that undergraduate course. So, and getting back to Brian's point, that some of the issues at that time, and it's funny what drives rates. And there were a lot of things that were driving rates other than just the rise of the cost of fuel, and which is brought out in our study. It was the construction project was the big issue then. And since the utilities earn rate of returns on investment, the more construction they could get, the more money they can earn. Mm-hmm. And in the report, and probably get into this a little later, is that it was one of the early cries for let's stop construction and replace generation with conservation. And that's been a theme of the report in '78, and it's continued through the district, through the Office of People's Counsel. And a modern version of that is how do we design a distribution system? And then
that's right.
So the themes that started out then are still around today.
Absolutely, and that's a issue that we are still grappling with because the utilities are investing enormous amount of money in capital projects, and obviously they get a return on that. And not only that, but to the extent that they continue to do that, it usurps the ability to add, renewables and to change the way that the resources that are used because it's already blocked out.
Well, you see, that goes to your point. They commit enormous amounts of money and then blackmail everybody into saying you have to cover us.
Right.
That's the problem. Now, the reason I was so aggressive wasn't because I didn't like the utilities, but I have roots in Seattle. And in Seattle, the utilities there had gone in and assured the commission and the community that this construction project of that was really absolutely necessary, and everybody trusted them. Well, then 2 years later, they wrote off $2.5 billion because they screwed up, and they blew away the city of Seattle almost. And so then I'm coming in as People's Counsel in '77, and I'm looking at the president of PEPCO, like Jerome, who says, we got to build 2 nuclear power plants. And it's like, the hell you say, we're going to find out, okay? And fortunately, the office had not only the political ability and the confidence of the community, but we had the resources because of the assessment authority. And we used it. And in that case, we did engineering analysis that they had never done. And we proved, and this is what really caused them to go berserk with the cub behind us, that the reliability, that the reserve margin they needed of 24% was actually 12 to 16%. Mm-hmm. And so the commission had, for the first time, the engineering analysis to say no. And PEPCO went berserk, but too bad,
Right.
In a lot of ways, we saved PEPCO.
We did save PEPCO, and in fact, PEPCO told us that privately, because they would have gone bankrupt just as the Titanic sank and the people up in Northwest went under. We saved them, and their chief financial officer actually told us that privately.
Okay.
Well, I
hadn't heard that story,
but it's true. He did. He told me that.
Yeah, the point is that we knew we saved them,
right?
Because otherwise they would have been bankrupt, and we'd been.
And of course, it saved the city. Because imagine what would have happened to Washington D.C. if we'd had a multi-billion-dollar company go bankrupt.
Correct.
Okay. I think that we have the Office of People's Counsel has made all of the utilities better in general.
Right.
That's what we do. But I did want to move on in view of time to Jean.
Yeah.
Jean, you've been with the office for 24 years.
Let's not date my age. Actually,
tell us something about what you've seen, how you've been able to interact with the community. There was a lot of discussion in terms of engagement, community engagement. Well, you are actually one of the people that consistently engages our consumers and our clients. Tell me a little bit about your experience.
Okay, well, thank you, Sandra. Let me just share. I started at OPC in 1984, and at that time, I started as the secretary to the Deputy People's Counsel. Later became the staff assistant to the People's Counsel. And most recently, or within the last 10 years, I have served as a community education and outreach specialist in the Consumer Services Division. Everything I did prepared me for what I'm doing today. I met this woman by the name of Juanita Thornton when I first came to OPC. And she said, be kind to the elderly because if you live long enough, you will be one. And I took that to heart. And what does it mean to be kind? It means to protect, educate, and assure that they can do things like age in place. So as a community outreach specialist, my focus has been with the senior community. I go out into the community, thanks to your charge, to make certain that all persons have a place at the table, to ensure that they are made aware of all of the changes that are happening in the utility arena. And as you know, we have seen a multitude of changes, from divestiture to deregulation, the influx of third-party suppliers, choice, renewable energy, just a multitude of changes. And I have seen the work of our office make a huge impact. I'm not sure if that has sort of addressed the question.
Brian, go ahead.
I wanted to personally thank Rick Powell and Lenore Pomerantz, because what kept us from going over was their tireless organizing of the community, and they were passionate. I mean, like Jerome said, they came to him. I mean, I tasked them with the assignment of let's have a steel curtain support for the office from the community, and that was their job, and they were the baddest organizers. And I came here as an organizer, so before I was a lawyer concerning the war. So I want to thank them, because Jerome knows what a difference they made. And whenever, they would tell me what was going on, they would tell the Cub what was going on, and Charles Warfield, who was another. And so whenever the utilities would make their move, the Cub would go down there, Rick would go down there, Lenore would go down there, and they couldn't penetrate the steel curtain of confidence that the council and the mayor had. And of course, having the success in the cases didn't hurt.
Right. I've been following up on Gene's. It's as Gene pointed out, the office has reached out to the elderly, the senior community, but in the early Cub days, most of the Cub members were the elderly. Mary
That's
Traub,
right.
Charlie Warfield. There's probably a list of them there, and
It is in the report.
it's in the report.
And we just brought them in and gave them said, go get them.
Colonel Haley.
Colonel Haley, that's right.
He was tough.
So what I
Charlie Warfield.
right. So
George Gurley.
George Gurley, right. So these were all the seniors were carrying the charge. I wasn't a senior then. I'm a senior. I'm like you. I lived following Juanita Thornton. I've lived long enough.
Yeah,
So-
well, me too. I mean, I was 32 when I was people, if you can imagine.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
were all really, we were
Really
young.
Right. And the thing about that is that what it highlighted, whether you're young or senior, is that there is a what it highlighted is that there is a intelligence in the community.
That's right.
And one of the things that Cub in relationship to the Office of People's Counsel around the issues of utility were able to capture the intelligence of the community. Some of my most memorable meetings was when these so-called experts would come up there, and people like Mary Traub, Charlie Warfield, I forget the gentleman who was blind, who
Thornton.
Thornton.
Yeah.
Thurston.
Yeah.
And
Lord.
they would
But he was smart.
they
were
would
all
take
smart.
they would take the experts apart, and the experts were astonished that these so-called people who were not informed or didn't have the degrees were able to not only analyze the case but come up with significant counter arguments and proposals that now, as we talked about, not only saved the ratepayers but also saved the company.
And it happened with the telephone company too, because they, and the gas company. I mean, this was an across-the-board impact.
Right.
I think that one thing that characterized the People's Council, all of the People's Councils, was that passion and commitment. and the willingness to go the mile.
Yes.
Not to settle for just the standard operating procedure, but to take it a step further. What would you say how would you assess the utility landscape today?
Well, it's always, it's like your eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and that's what I would say. The utilities, are still focused on themselves, and you have to be vigilant. So, you can't let your guard down. It's not that we're against them making money, but you got to be vigilant, and so our job is to protect the People's Council and the public. After that, I was the chair of the Ward 3 Democratic Committee, and we use all our authority in the city, and like the mayor asked me to support her for re-election, to support the People's Council and everything, because it's ultimately, you've got to have political support, and you can't have them going to the council and the mayor and saying, oh, they're a bunch of termites.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are moving toward a conclusion of this program. I can't believe that the time went by so quickly. But as I noted, this is the first of a series, and we will be able to explore some of the other issues with more detail. But Brian, I'll ask you,
Yes.
What do you think is your legacy?
The community, or bringing the power of the people to these issues, so that their interests are taken care of and not the interests of the money. And if people think this is an academic discussion, look at what's going on in our presidential politics right now. It's the same thing, where you have a president who doesn't know anything and nearly sold out the country. And I happen to be an expert in international relations, and I know that. So that's what I'd say about the Office of People's Counsel.
And you in particular. Yes.
Well, but I was just determined to establish our capacity and credibility, because these things never stop. And I think we all succeeded. And I want to thank you, because you came in and you and Betty and the Cub, people have just carried it on. I couldn't be People's Counsel forever.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I am getting the signal. So, as I said, we will be able to continue this dialogue. This was exciting for me. I hope it was for you as well, and for our listening audience. The future podcast, because we didn't get to some of the things that are really, really important, one of the things that I am looking at is affordability, particularly because we have so many changes. We're trying to reach
That's right.
these climate change goals. How are we going to do that and still make certain that everyone still can afford the essential services that utilities provide? We will talk about solar and teaser our new role in water. We now are able to represent water consumers in the District of Columbia. So I'm excited about that. But again, thank you very much for participating. This was really exciting, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's an honor.
It's like a reunion.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Well, I would just reiterate the point that Brian made, is that we have to continue carrying on the struggle. It's endless, it's ceaseless, but we have to be there. Conditions change, issues change.
Okay.
But we need to make sure that the consumer voice is at the table.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Again, if you want to contact the Office of People's Counsel, please, we are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, or you can reach us at DC People's Council, DCOPC-Gov. Thank you.
In DC, for DC, DC Radio, 96.3 HD4, and DCRadio.gov.